The last U.S. Navy ship used in the evacuation of Saigon reached Subic Bay in the Philippines today with 177 refugees. After processing, they will be transferred to Guam, where Bruce Dunning reports on the recent refugee arrivals.
We're just the beginning of the largest group of refugees yet to arrive. In the next week to 10 days, about 80,000 refugees are expected here by ship, a number almost equal to the entire population of Guam. Many of these people had fled from South Vietnam in small boats, hoping to be picked up by ships out at sea. How many more set out to sea but were never picked up, no one will ever know.
We left crafts, boats, all kinds of Navy crafts. Some were burning, just cast adrift, and people scrambling about trying to get on board. It was impossible.
Mrs. Pham Thi Dao arrived with her 7 children and her husband. They fled from the coastal resort of Vung Tau on the day that Saigon fell. They were picked up from a tiny fishing boat and have spent a week at sea. Medical checks were the first step in the arrival processing.
Let me see your face here, sweetie.
7-month-old Hai had a fever and diarrhea. Mrs. Dao had conjunctivitis, a highly infectious eye disease which hundreds on the ship have contracted. But doctors said this was the only major health problem among the ship's passengers. They were impressed with the general good health of the refugees, despite their physical and emotional ordeal. As the first arrivals continued their processing, others waited for hours to debark from the ship. It took all night to unload the ship, and at dawn, another ship entered the harbor with 6,000 more refugees. And there are more ships behind them, arriving in a few days, as the total of refugees continues to grow to well over 100,000. Bruce Dunning, CBS News, Guam.
From Guam, the refugees will be transferred to one of 3 military bases in the U.S. At one of them, Camp Pendleton in California, Terry Drinkwater reports on how the Vietnamese are trying to adapt to their new lives.
The language is what scares the Vietnamese most about their new country. Very few of those now arriving speak English. Classes teaching the fundamentals have just begun at Camp Pendleton. How to ask for what you need and how to express your thanks to those who help. For these first sessions, mostly the children and teenagers came. It was the Vietnamese themselves who asked for the classes because they realize they will be spread out all over the United States and they know they must learn English. More and more, the Vietnamese are taking charge of their own lives in the refugee camps. Each of the tent cities here has its own mayor. This man was a respected doctor back home, a natural choice in an informal election. Through the mayors, some Vietnamese complain about the long lines for processing and for meals. They tell their own elected officials they would prefer chopsticks, they're in short supply, and that they'd like their rice a little less soggy. But by and large, there are not many complaints. The refugees say Pendleton is far better than Guam. Among the latest arrivals from Guam is former Vietnamese Vice President Ky. He raided a tent all by himself last night. A friend even ordered breakfast brought to him. A few of his countrymen came to ask for help today. Where were the rest of their families? There was little he could do. But mostly, it wasn't his countrymen who sought him out. American newsmen today seemed to be more interested in Ky than the refugees were. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Camp Pendleton.
The United States began airlifting out of Thailand today more than 250 Cambodian refugees who had...
A week out of Phu Quoc Island, South Vietnam, the freighter American Challenger arrived today in Guam with more than 5,000 South Vietnamese refugees aboard. The captain said he left behind possibly 50,000 people on Phu Quoc and just off its shores in small boats, and he added that 3 infants died aboard his ship while half a dozen more were born. Lou Allison reports.
For the next 10 days, American ships like this one will be bringing South Vietnamese refugees to Guam. In all, the sealift will add 80,000 evacuees to the more than 50,000 who have begun moving through Guam by airlift. The first evacuation ship, the American Challenger, docked at the Guam Navy Station early Wednesday morning, Guam time, with more than 5,000 people aboard. People at sea a full week, but most of them in good health and happy to be safe here. The American officials running Operation New Life say they're noticing marked changes as the flood of refugees continues to grow. They say these people and those on the other ships are much poorer than those who came before. These people told NBC News reporter No Yen Ki that the largest single group of refugees aboard the American Challenger were penniless fishermen from the southern coast of Vietnam. The fishermen and their families, numbering more than 1,000, are actually North Vietnamese. They fled their homes more than 20 years ago to get away from the communists then. In this rescue operation, the evacuation ship had to leave thousands of people behind, and the ship's captain said there was desperation among those left in their fishing boats.
Howling, crying. These people, some on the boats had families on the ship. Therefore, it was being separated. And you can just imagine the reaction of these people. Just yelling, come back, leave, do something. But this is the reaction of many human beings being broken up from family, not knowing what the future will hold for them.
The fishermen and their families may face many months, perhaps years, in resettlement and training camps here or on the United States mainland. The fact that they were uprooted by war once before and resettled in South Vietnam with no other skills than fishing will make it much harder for them to start a new life in America, and much harder for Americans to help them. Lou Allison, NBC News, Guam.
The most prominent of the South Vietnamese refugees to arrive at Camp Pendleton, California, is Nguyen Cao Ky, former vice president of South Vietnam.